Okay, sorry, I was
Yeah.
muted. Just to finish up our study on the Sabbath, which I'm still learning about. Um, but hold on, let me see. Where do I want to start? Uh, I'll just recap from right here. What life is like in the millennium. And there's a difference between the 1000 years that Jesus reigns on the earth with resurrected believers. Uh it's different from the new heaven and the new earth. We looked at on Saturday in Isaiah 2 and Micah chapter 4. If you look, I'm going between each one. They're almost exactly word for word the same passage. And scholars wonder, you know, who wrote what first? Did Isaiah write it first or did Micah? I think a lot of people think that Isaiah wrote it first and then Micah, borrowed it. But they say basically the same thing, that in the latter days, uh, in verse 4 here in Isaiah, it says, He, and that's Jesus, will judge between the nations. And I think that goes back to him. He'll rule with a rod of iron. And he shall decide disputes for many peoples. And if you think back to King Solomon, he decided disputes. They had one example of the two prostitutes and their babies that died. And then later on in the Gospels, we see that Jesus says one greater than Solomon is here. And based off of our studies that we've done of Solomon, we know that he fell away later in his life. And the Bible actually doesn't ever record him repenting, because I don't think he ever did. And I think that's why Jesus said one greater than Solomon is here, one who was obedient to the Father. And I think that's why the Gospels point out, or the New Testament, that he was obedient even unto death. And here we see him deciding disputes, but he's greater than Solomon. He's not going to defect. He's not going to fall away. He already accomplished what he set out to do. And then it says that there are swords and spears, basically weapons of war, will be turned into other tools, plowshares or pruning hooks. Micah 4 says the same thing. We looked at a really interesting verse, Isaiah 65, where at the beginning it says, Behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. It says, But be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy, and her people to be gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. So here we see that if someone dies at 100 years old, they'll be considered a young person. But earlier in the chapter, we see that it says that he's creating a new heavens and a new earth. So how is that possible? How is that in the new heaven and the new earth that there, is still death? Well, I don't think that this verse, what verse would it be? Verse 20. I don't think verse 20 is describing the new heaven and the new earth. I think, and we talked about it on Saturday, that there, a lot of times in the Old Testament, there was like blurring that happened. The blurring of Yahweh and the angel of the Lord. You see instances in the Old Testament where someone like Abraham or Gideon or Jacob, they're talking, or Moses, they're talking to Yahweh, or they're talking to the angel of the Lord. But then in that same passage, it says, and Yahweh said. And it shows that the angel of the Lord and Yahweh were one, that it was the same person in two distinct forms. We see it also in the Old Testament with Yahweh and the Holy Spirit. They're blurred into one because they're the same. Jesus' first and his second comings were blurred. The Jews, that's why they missed it. And that's why they didn't understand what Jesus was doing. Even his disciples didn't understand that, he was going to accomplish one thing at his first coming, and then he was going to accomplish another thing during his second coming. And even the disciples thought both of those things were the same thing, and that they were all going to happen at once. And so I think this could possibly be what's going on here in Isaiah 65, that there's some blurring of the millennial kingdom with the new heaven and the new earth, or there's something going on in the new earth that we'll be shocked by. Maybe there's something to be revealed, because there's a lot of things in the Bible that are concealed right now, and we don't have a full understanding of what exactly the millennial kingdom is going to look like, and what even the new heaven and the new earth. Paul talked about that. Like, we can't even fathom the things that God has in store for us. And then I just gathered up some things about the millennial kingdom. And this would be a good argument point for those that believe we're living in the millennium right now, because a lot of people think that the millennium is symbolic language for the time that we're currently living in, the church age, or the time between Jesus' first and second coming. The idea that Satan is bound. So that's one of the arguments of someone of, say, like the all-millennialist or the post-millennialist. They say Satan is bound right now, that Jesus severely, hampered his ability when he died, which is true, he did, but he's not bound. Just take one look at the news. Take a look at all the evil things that happen in the world. Satan, he's out and about. And the powers of darkness are. Him being bound is for a future time. And it's during the millennium that is an actual period of time that is 1,000 years. That's future. Satan will be bound during that time, where he's no longer allowed to deceive the nations. Because right now, let's be honest, he's deceiving the nations. I don't even see how you could argue that. But he's not going to be able to in the millennial kingdom. And I believe part of that reason is to show that, because if we go further, we see that the resurrection happens before the resurrection and the rapture, same thing, where we rule with Christ. And then in Zechariah 14, we saw that we keep the Feast of Booths, which is really interesting, because that it talks about that, and that's never happened, we don't do that right now, so we keep the Feast of Booths, which is really interesting. The people that think we live in the millennial kingdom right now, they have no explanation for Zechariah 14. So that point is often ignored by the amillennialist or the post-millennialist. And then we see that punishments and plagues are handed out, which is interesting, which means that not everybody actually believes in Jesus. Which goes to show that a lot of our unbelief, we can't blame on the powers of darkness. We can't blame on the devil. Unbelief stems from within. And that'll be evident in the millennial kingdom, that we'll be living in a time period of peace and, prosperity. But yet there's going to be some people that still, they don't believe. And when I first came across that, I was like, how is that possible? Like, how can you see Jesus face to face and then still not believe in him? But there's precedence for that. The angels that sinned, the angels in heaven that sinned, they were face to face. They dwelt with God and they decided to rebel. Judas Iscariot saw Jesus face to face, decided to rebel. God gives us that choice. Adam and Eve in the garden, they dwelt with God. They decided to rebel. And so we don't need Satan in order to rebel against God. That spirit of rebellion stems from within. Satan and the powers of darkness just amplify it. And then I asked what lies beyond the millennium, and it's the 8th day. And that's an interesting term, the 8th day. I think the Bible Project kind of touched on it in the Sabbath video. Why not, with the 8th day? So if we look at Leviticus 23, he says on the 15th day of the 7th month, for 7 days is the Feast of Booths. So this is what we're celebrating, or we're still partaking in this festival in the millennium, in the millennial kingdom. And it says on the first day shall be a holy convocation, which we know is a rehearsal. So on the first day is a rehearsal, and you shall not do any ordinary work. For 7 days you shall present food offerings to the Lord. And then on the 8th day, it says you shall hold another holy convocation, or there's another rehearsal, and present food offerings to Yahweh. It's a solemn assembly. You shall not do any work. So why did Moses when describing this feast, why did he say on the 8th day? Why didn't he say, why doesn't he just say the first day of the next week? I think there's an intentional reason as to why he said the 8th day. That when you read something like that, maybe start going off in your head like, I need to keep an eye on that phrase or on that term, or maybe the number 8 in general, because we know the number 7 is the number of completeness. We see that all over the book of Revelation, 7's all over the place. But here we see in Leviticus 23 that the number 8 is significant. It was on the 8th day that the children were to be circumcised. And circumcision was a symbol of submission to God, that you are a part of his covenant family. And it was done on the 8th day. Why wasn't it done on the 7th day or the 10th day or whatever? But it was specifically on the 8th day. And I think because it was pointing to something future. Ezekiel 43. when it talks about the new temple or the future temple of God. And in the Bible Project here, when they have their outline of the book, if you look in at the end, chapters 40 through 48, it's talking about God's relationship at the end of time to all creation. And in chapters 40 to 46, and we're looking at chapter 43, but in chapters 40 to 46, Ezekiel gets a vision of a new temple. And they say on here that there's, two common interpretations here. That one, either Ezekiel is seeing a vision of a literal temple, or it's symbolic, and it's a symbolic depiction of God's presence with his people in the Messianic kingdom. And you probably know where I land on this. I think it's symbolic language. I don't think that there's going to be a physical temple in the new heaven and the new earth, because the temple was it was symbolic for God's dwelling place. And we were, as humans, we were marred in sin. And so they had to go through certain rituals in order for God to dwell within the tabernacle or the temple. They had to be ritually pure. But in the new heaven and the new earth, after what Jesus has done for us, and we, have our resurrected, glorified bodies, we're no longer ritually impure to enter God's presence. The blood of Jesus allows us to be in God's presence in our glorified bodies. And it's interesting here when he's talking about this temple, he says, 7 days shall they make atonement for the altar and cleanse it, and so consecrate it. And when they have completed these days, then from the 8th day onward, the priest shall offer on the altar your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, and I will accept you, declares the Lord. And so I think this is, remember, we keep the Feast of Booths. And then on the 8th day, they were to have a holy convocation. And I think what Ezekiel is describing here in chapter 43 is the entering in to that new era, the 8th day. After the 7th millennium, we're entering the 8th millennium, basically, or the 8th day. And what exactly does the 8th day symbolize or represent? I think it represents the new heaven and the new earth, where God dwells with his creation. What does it mean when you consecrate something? Because it's talking about this temple being built, and they're doing something for 7 days, and then on the 8th day, they consecrate it. And then God says that he will accept us. Let's see. So Revelation 20, this is where it's talking about Satan being bound for 1,000 years. We get all this talk of 1,000 years. In our first study that we did, we saw that, it was a common belief during the time when John wrote this, that they believed that there would be a 6,000 year period of history where man ruled the earth, where we were allowed to basically choose good and evil on our own terms. And it always ends up horrible for us. And then on the 7th day, or the 7th millennium, that Jesus is going to reign himself. And what I wanted to point out here was the resurrections. In verse 4, it says, John says, I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. And I think this goes back to Paul's language, where he says, don't you know, brothers, that you will judge angels? And he says, also, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshiped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. And it says they came to life. And I think it's talking about the resurrection and the rapture. And they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. And the rest of the dead, so those that didn't believe in Jesus, it says they did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. And then he talks about this first resurrection. And he says, blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. And when he says the first resurrection, by default, he's implying that there is another resurrection. You know, because you can't have a first resurrection unless you have another one that comes after. Over such, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. And then later on in chapter 20, it talks about the second resurrection. So this is after the 1,000 years. And he says, I saw a great white throne. And I think that this is connected to King Solomon somehow, because it talks about Solomon having a great throne made of pearls. And Jesus was seated on it. And it says, from his presence, earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And so I think the first part where it says the books were open, I think that's referring to, it's basically their rap sheet, maybe. You know, everybody that was resurrected after, all the deeds that they had done on the earth, you know, all of the things that Jesus has against them, you know, a list of their sins, the things that they've done, to show that his judgment against them isn't unjust, that it is in fact just. And then John says that there's another book, and he says that's the book of life, and that one was opened. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, and that is, you know, their deeds. Their deeds are listed in the books. And because he says it's according to what they had done. And then it says the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. So the books that were open was a list of all of the sins that they had committed, all the things that they had done, and they were judged by what they had done. See, when we die, God doesn't bring out those books against us, because the punishment that we were supposed to get for the deeds that we've committed, he placed those on Jesus at the cross. And so that we're forgiven. And so God doesn't pull out those books when we stand before him. But we see here on the second resurrection that those books come out and the people are judged by what they had done. It says, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Yep.
Okay. Would just like to welcome Jezebel. Hi, Jess.
Hi there.
Jezebel is a member of our church in Tracy, and I have invited her to be a part of our study.
Cool. Tonight. Glad you could join us.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So verse 14, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And if you remember at the first resurrection, it says those who partake in the first resurrection, the second death has no power over them. And then it says, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. And we could do a whole thing on the book of life, because earlier in chapter 2 or 3, I think it talks about God not blotting someone's name out, which goes to show that some people's names do get blotted out. But that's another topic. So Revelation 21, we're getting towards the end here. And he says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And so a lot of people take that to mean like, oh, there's no water in heaven, there's no ocean, there's no sea. That's not what's being talked about here. You know, the sea was its symbolic language for chaos, you know, destruction. And so that, you know, the chaos and evil and destruction, you know, brought on by sin and the powers of darkness, that is no more. You know, that's why in the Old Testament you get talk of the Leviathan, which is like a sea dragon or a sea monster. And in some of the Day of the Lord passages, Leviathan, you know, gets dealt with. He's killed, you know, because he's symbolic of, I don't know, the ruler of the sea, maybe. And it says that he is no more. And then it says, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with him as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And I think that's describing what we read about in Ezekiel 43 with the vision that Ezekiel had of the new temple. The new temple is the new creation because that's where God dwells. And it was on the 8th day. And in the Bible Project, on their video, we've watched it a couple times before, their video on the temple, they ask, you know, does God ever build a new temple? And they answer it, you know, and I think they would take Ezekiel 43 as symbolic language, not, you know, I don't think Ezekiel was talking about an actual physical structure where God dwells in the new heaven and the new earth, because all of creation, you know, is going to be God's dwelling place, and we can dwell with him freely there. And so that's how the book ends, is the start of the 8th day, which I think is intentional in Leviticus 23, where it talks about, you know, because that was the last feast that Israel celebrated throughout the year. They had 7 yearly feasts. The Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles, was the last one. And that one was a feast that it was 8 days long. And they had a holy convocation on the first day, and then the 8th, which would have been the start of the next week. But Moses doesn't say it's the first day of the next week. He says it's the 8th day.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
you know, speaks of its importance. And I don't think I fully understand what exactly he means or what's going on there. It's something that we should keep an eye on when we read our Bibles. You know, take a mental note every time you come across the number 8, you know, and its significance.
Scott, you're saying like the weekday cycle is gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
The 7-day cycle. It's when it has really already reached completion, right now on the 7th day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then the 8 days, the new heaven and the new earth.
Yeah.
So the 7th day, the Sabbath day, is the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we still look forward to. Okay.
Yes.
And
yes. And
go ahead.
It's like, so then the question then is like, why then in Zechariah 14 is it talking about that we celebrate, or where we keep the Feast of Booths in the millennial kingdom, you know. And I think part of the reason, this is a theory that I have, is that I believe during the final part of this current age, you know, the tribulation or the great tribulation, as the Bible describes it, I think God protects us during that time. Just as he protected Israel in the wilderness, I think he protects us during that time. And part of the reason why we partake in that feast is because we're remembering God's protection of us during that time. And so, you know, like Jesus came and he fulfilled, you know, he died on Passover. You know, we think he's coming back, you know, on the Feast of Trumpets. And in a way, this Feast of Booths, it's this, like scholars talk about this already not yet idea that we find in the Bible. Like the kingdom is already here, but it's not yet. Like it's consummated, but it's not yet fulfilled. Or it's inaugurated, but it's not yet consummated. And I think that same idea is applied to the Feast of Booths in the millennial kingdom, is that it's inaugurated once again, but it's not fully consummated until the end of the millennium or the start of the 8th day.
The new heaven and the new earth.
Yeah, the new heaven and the new earth. And that's when everything, all of human history, you know, comes to its completion.
So I would like to clarify. Okay, the Great Tribulation is not happening yet. It is not here yet, right?
No.
The Great Tribulation is still on during the millennium, right? Or is it before the millennium?
It's before. It's
Okay.
before the millennium, I think.
Okay.
And then right after that, right at the end of the Great Tribulation is when Jesus comes back. And we get the day of the Lord.
Mm.
And then the day of the Lord ushers in the final day.
Seventh day.
The 7th day of human history, which would be a millennium long. You get what I'm saying? So
Yes,
the
sir.
day of the Lord ushers in the day of the Lord, or the 1,000 years of the Lord, of Jesus.
And you're saying that we're in the final seconds?
Yeah. So yeah, like if you do the math, you know, Jesus has been, you know, he died 2,000 years ago, almost. 1,990 years ago, or however you want to do the math. I think he died in like the year 30, around there. And so in the year 2030 will be 2,000 years. So we're getting close to the 2,000 year. And like I got to mention again, I'm not saying Jesus is coming back in the year 2030. I have no idea when he's coming back, but I'm just saying that year will be around exactly 2,000 years since he died.
You cannot tell exactly. You cannot say exactly he's not coming back on 2030 though.
But whichever way you want to slice it, we're in the final seconds of the 6th day.
14 years. Wow. So I'll still be around. Not in the ground yet.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Myra, you have 14 years. I don't know what you want, Myra. You want to be resurrected, or you want the rapture?
I want the rapture.
You want the rapture.
I'm a believer in the rapture. Yeah.
Okay.
You know how I've been studying this for years too myself, you know, and how I understand it, you have the Old Testament, you have the New Testament, then you have the church age, and then you have the rapture of the church age, then you have 7 years of tribulation, And then you have the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And then after the 1,000-year, you have the new kingdom.
The new heaven and
new
the new
earth.
earth.
Yeah,
New
new heaven
creation.
and new earth. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I've, the teachers that I listen to, that's how they've explained it to me. Dr. Jeremiah went through all that, Perry Stone, so that's the line, that's the timeline I look at.
And I think it's the same, consistent with the timeline that actually Scott shared to us.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
Mhm.
I think we might disagree on a couple little timeline when certain things happen, but for the most part, we definitely agree.
Yeah.
Wow. This is amazing. So the one that you are showing now and the screen, it's the new heaven and the new earth, right? Is it, or the?
Yeah, it's just a like a still from the Bible Project video on the temple,
Hmm,
which I highly recommend.
yeah.
Scott, the eighth day, would that be the time when the old earth and the old heaven will disappear
Yep.
and God will have to create a new one? That's why it
Yep.
doesn't follow the 1 to 7 thing.
Yep. I
Days.
believe so.
So it's
Yeah.
a totally new one.
Yep.
Yep.
It's a new countdown.
It's a restored Garden of Eden where heaven and earth completely overlap.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just have a comment about the millennium, because
Mhm.
it has not been really expounded a lot in the church about the millennium.
Mhm.
But the way you presented it, it seems like people will still travel from their place to
Their work.
Jerusalem.
Yep.
It's like when Solomon was reigning, like people from different parts of the world, like the Queen of Sheba, would go and listen to his wisdom.
Yep.
So it's something like that in the millennium. People will still travel and
Yeah.
listen to the wisdom of Jesus.
Yep.
Mhm.
I think so. How we will travel? I don't know.
Maybe there's jets.
Maybe we teleport.
Magic carpets.
You never know.
There will be
Yeah.
horses, Jesus is coming on a horse, so we might
The
become
horse with the
horses too,
flies.
and
Yeah.
we don't
Horses
know.
that have wings.
So I think this is something that we have to remember, that in the millennium, it is still what? The old earth. I mean, it's just that
It's
Jesus
still.
now
I think
arrived.
it's still the current Earth that we see
Yes.
right now.
Only that we have now Jesus here as the head of government, in the government of the nations.
Mm-hmm.
And what really actually surprised me, and really sort of I'm thinking, because even then in the millennium, there are still people who doesn't believe in Jesus. Is that
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying? I mean,
Yeah.
and that Satan is bound,
Yep.
and that's a scary thought, because I thought, if Satan is bound, and we were doing that all the time, and we are binding the evil spirit so that he cannot do his thing. But the truth is, even if all the demonic spirits and Satan himself is bound,
Mm-hmm.
people still have the choice to make whether they will submit to Jesus or not.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
I thought you're a reform, Josh. I mean, Scott. So you're not a reform anymore, huh? In that.
Nope. No, not. No. No. After
So we should not be
coming across
blaming.
this stuff, like I can't yeah.
So
No.
we should not be blaming Satan all the time.
All the time.
We should be teaching individual
Responsibility.
and
Mhm.
responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the powers of darkness and Satan, they definitely bear some responsibility for what we see in the
Mhm.
world today.
Mm-hmm.
But we evil truly, like, it stems from within us, you know? Like, no matter how many bad things happen in the world, like, we still have all of us, each day we have choices in what we do and choices that we make, you know, whether, and a lot of times Satan's not, he's not omnipresent, he's not everywhere at once, so
Yeah.
he's probably
But
saving himself for the
but Scott, don't you think that, all of us were like that before we knew Christ, before we became born again?
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, we had our own thoughts, we had our own way of thinking, we had our own
Mhm.
way of doing things,
Mhm.
So that's the way it'll be in the millennium for the people.
Yep.
Yeah.
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 The same.
I just, another thing I want to throw in there. Do you guys know, have you heard of Robert Jeffries, a pastor?
Yeah, from
Anyway,
Dallas.
yeah, he says, you can write these down, based on Revelation 4:10 and Revelation 19:8. He believes that right after the rapture, that all the Christians will be getting rewards during those 7 years. So I just throw that out as another interesting thought.
Yes. Well, the thing is this, Myra, that's true. I'm looking forward to that reward, but the reward actually is more responsibilities, and Jesus spoke about this in parables, that because you did a good job here, when the millennium, you're going to be given more responsibilities. So I don't know how many, how many, I mean, how many cities would I be responsible of?
Uh-huh.
Because
And I
that
think
is
that's
what,
what the
yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that's what the crown language that we read about in Revelation, like, I
Right,
think it was one of the letters to the 7 churches that they were given a crown,
right. Yeah.
and the crown represents rule and authority,
Mm.
more so than it does a reward or a prize. I think it speaks to the fact that we co-rule with Jesus during this time. And I think that's why it says that we're priests, because we then become the mediators between the other people that populate or that are born during this time, to point them to Jesus.
Mm.
And
And don't forget, there's a whole universe out there that might need work.
Right? Yeah. The thing is this, because
But you see, with the responsibility, I believe there is joy and accomplishment and being able to express the God's given gifts to the maximum. So
Mhm.
there's a reward in a sense that you can do a lot and be happy with what you are doing. Not
Yes.
Yeah.
labor as a punishment, not
Yep.
work as a
Uh-huh.
punishment, but an expression of creativity.
Mhm.
And there's a joy in accomplishing what you have done.
Yeah.
Yes, I think because we are also, our mind is also corrupted here on earth. Like when our understanding of what a reward is, we thought that it's something that we can just enjoy for ourselves, but that is not actually the reward or the award or that we have to expect in the kingdom.
Mhm.
Remember what Jesus said about the servants, enter into the joy of your king. That's the reward. What is that joy? The sense of satisfaction that you have actually made God happy. by what you did. And we will be given more of that in the millennium. You know, the crown that we have to expect are that, like what Helen said, the sense of fulfillment, the sense of wholeness that we experience when we did something that is good within the realm of our capabilities, of our gifts. You know, so I don't know what artistic potentials God has given each one of us, but once we have exercised them, once we have used them, the tremendous joy that we have inside us, now multiply that many more times in the
Yeah.
millennium, when Jesus himself said, you know, I'm giving you more things to do that will really make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I don't know what that is for each one of us. I have mine. You know, I'm expecting, you know,
Yeah.
what makes me happy.
Mhm.
So for me, maybe Jezebel is the artist of the Light of the Nations in Tracy. So maybe it's more tables to paint, or I don't know.
Pastor, be careful saying my name.
It's okay. Oh, no. Okay. Jess. So, I don't know about Delane. I don't know what is it that you want to do, but you will get to do more of that and get more satisfaction doing that in the millennium. And for Scott, I don't know and painting, designing, you know. You might get to design one side of the temple. But so this is, we have to start to think and talk about the kingdom, the millennium, in really some kind of physical sense. That we get to do the things that we're doing here, but now we're doing it not out of compulsion, not because we need to, but because we really want to. And by doing that, we get to give joy to the heart of God. And then to hear him say, wow, Lito, you did a good job. Or Scott, that's awesome, but I mean, you know, to be praised by Jesus for what you have done. Good job. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so Scott, what's coming next?
Honestly, I have no idea.
Okay, but we will be here on Wednesday.
Hey, you have not finished the revelations yet, Scott.
No,
Okay.
No, we have that. I think I was gonna redo the image of the beast. If you
Oh,
remember,
yeah,
I did
that's
that.
right.
I think I did that last. I think it was this summer, but it feels like it was like about 2 years ago.
Yes.
But I think I might redo that one
Okay, good.
for like a Saturday or something.
Or a Wednesday, whatever. But thing is, you have a context now because of these vaccines going around. But people are already talking about, you know, mutants, you know,
Yeah.
because of the vaccine and things like that. So we were just having fun talking about this last time. Remember? You know?
Mhm.
But now it's really happening, seems to be. So, okay, so we will talk about the beast or the image of the beast next time. And let's get excited about that. Whether that's going to be on the Wednesday or on a Saturday, it depends on Jarrett. When is he going to be available to give us? I think next week he is good already Saturday, so you may have to take the Wednesday.
Okay.
You okay with that, Scott?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so everyone, thank you so much for tonight. Really have fun being with you. And Scott, thank you. Jess, I hope you would still be with us next time. You know, and
Yeah,
if
I'll
there's
be
anyone
here
who would like to
next
join,
time.
just let me know. We can
I'll
share
be here
the
next
link to
time.
them.
Cool.
Okay, be safe, everyone, and good night.
All right.
Good
See
night.
ya.
Good night.
God bless
Thank you,
you.
Scott.
Yep.